I have put out several videos recently explaining why I don't believe in looking for the rapture on or near particular dates. No man knows the day nor the hour. The rapture isn't signaled by anything with the date that can be known beforehand. The rapture is signaled by the approaching hurricane of prophetic convergence. This is easy to see coming, but it's hard to discern whether we're days, weeks, or months away from the rapture. Maybe even hard to discern whether we're a year or two away from the rapture. Now, there are many different aspects of this prophetic convergence. We have the nation of Israel in the Middle East. We have Russia, Iran, and Turkey, the fractured Roman Empire, the New World Order, the mark of the beast technology, the rise of Big Brother government, transhumanism. We could go on and on. Pick your poison. Pick your favorite area of interest. But if you want to know what my favorite rapture sign is, the one I think weighs heavier in the scale than any other when we're talking about the nearness of the rapture, stay tuned. Hi there, I'm Lee Brainerd. Welcome to Soothkeep and another edition of Prophecy in the Crucible. My mission is truth, truth at any cost, truth above every other consideration. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite rapture sign. Now, technically there aren't signs of the rapture. There's only signs of the stage building and stage setting for the tribulation. And we use these signs as a proxy for the fact that we're near to the rapture. Let's start with a brief introduction to prophetic convergence. We know that the rapture is rapidly racing towards us because we have a growing storm of prophetic convergence or prophetic stage setting that is happening in the world around us. And this storm is rapidly strengthening to hurricane strength. Now, prophetic convergence has its limitations. Unless the tribulation is literally banging away on your door, prophetic convergence cannot tell you whether you're weeks or months, maybe even a year or two away from the rapture. When people look at the current signs and say that the rapture is soon, I am in wholehearted agreement. It could happen. It could possibly happen today. It most likely is going to happen in the next few years, and it's absolutely certain going to happen before the fig tree generation goes into a nosedive. But when people look at the current signs around us and say that the rapture absolutely has to happen in the next few weeks or months, I shake my head. Folks, when I look around, I don't see anything in the present convergence that demands or proves the immediacy of the rapture. Nearness, yes. Immediacy, no. In the past few decades, we've had a pretty bad habit of overestimating the closeness of the rapture. And this reminds me of mountain climbing on a steep peak that you've never climbed before. You're going to think you've reached the top or neared the top a number of times before you actually reach the top. Now, convergence is our only guidepost. There's a variety of prophetic developments that are setting the world stage for the hour of trial that's going to come upon the whole world. And the road is marked by updated convergence signals. Every time we get new significant developments in the Middle East or in Russia or in the New World Order or wherever we're looking, these things get added to the mix. And so as we're marching down the road towards the rapture and marching down the road towards the tribulation, these prophetic convergence signs just have a bigger number and a bigger pile of ugly on them. But these signs don't tell us how many days in the journey are left. They only tell us that we're getting closer. That's it. Now, as I mentioned before, these signs don't strictly speak of the rapture. They strictly speak of the tribulation. The rapture doesn't have its own signs, so we use these signs for the stage setting of the tribulation as an indication that we're going to go up before that tribulation. Now, these prophetic signs vary in the strength of their signal. And there's two principles for dealing with these prophetic signs and calculating their strength. The first one is a general rule, the nearer those signs are to the rapture, the stronger the signal. And the second one is we have to bear in mind that technology signals can be misleading. Let me give you an example. I've got 4 decades in the rodeo of the mark of the beast technology. And over again, people have been pointing to mark of the beast technology. This started in the 70s. And they said this mark of the beast technology signals that the rapture is going to be in the near future and the tribulation is going to be in the near future. Well, not really. That's what the prophecy teachers thought, and this is just a classic example that we're getting ahead of ourselves when we interpret the prophetic signals. Now, no doubt we're way advanced, way beyond where we were 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I think we were way off base to say that we were really on the edge of the last days 10, 20, 30 years ago. I do not think that we're off base to think that today. You'd pretty much have to poke your eyes out and turn your brain off to think that what we see in the world around us has not got us creeping really close to the edge, to the end of this age. Now let's just take a quick look at 4 different easy to recognize major groups of signals that signal that we're in the last days. The first one is the Psalm 83 war on Gog and Magog. And I'm looking at both the run-up towards this time and the actual staging for the invasion. And involved in this whole mix, there's going to be alliances, there's going to be wars, there's going to be conquerings, there's going to be a Russian-dominated empire forged. And all these little other big nations and small nations that are going to be associated with them are going to have their own little followings. It's going to be a massive coalition. So that's the first sign or group of signs that I look at for the rapture. The second one is the developments in the fractured Roman Empire. And I'm looking at, or expecting to see, I should say, the EU and NATO fracturing in the face of a Russian push. I foresee Germany leaving the EU, and I foresee Turkey leaving NATO. I see the western half of the EU, the European half, reformulating itself so it more resembles the western half, the footprint of the western half of the Roman Empire. And I see the little horn exerting itself. And the third sign that I look at is the Antichrist sign. We're not, of course, going to see the Antichrist, but we're going to see the preparations for one world government. We're going to see a growing willingness for nations and states to relinquish their sovereignty and their freedom. We're going to see a growing public influence of the shadow government of the deep state. I mean, we've already seen some of these big names starting to appear in the world news on the headlines. 3-4 years ago, this was not happening. It wasn't really until the last 2 or 3 years that the deep state figures started to show their head in public. Now, we're going to see more of this. And the fourth sign that I look at as far as indicating the nearness of the rapture is a group of signs that we could call the Great Tribulation signs. And here we're looking at like the one world economic system, we're looking at worldwide social grading, we're looking at the mark of the beast technology. Now, my favorite sign out of all of these for the nearness of the rapture is the Psalm 83 war combined with the Gog and Magog war. I actually look at these two as one war where there's 2 aspects of a single war. You got 2 sets of nations gathered together in a coalition that have different motives, but they're going to come together in one massive war. Now, if you think that this is 2 separate wars, the Psalm 83 first and Ezekiel 38 and 39 second, that's fine. That's between you and the Lord. But this sign here, the Psalm 83 war and the Gog and Magog war, are closer to the timing of the rapture than any of the other signs that we're looking at. They precede the Roman Empire. They precede the rise of the Antichrist. They precede the mark of the beast and the Great Tribulation stuff. So as far as looking at prophetic convergence goes, this should be the one where we have our strongest focus. They make a better proximity signal for the nearness of the rapture. Now, I did mention that I treat Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 and 39 as a single war. I treat it as two distinct groups of allies. And we have one group is Israel's immediate neighbors preparing for invasion, and we have the Russia, Turkey, Iran coalition preparing for an invasion. And by the way, I think Germany is in this picture too. I believe that Gomer is Germany. Now, a lot of people look at the Middle Eastern maps of the time of Christ or the few centuries prior, and they see a place in Turkey called Gomer, and so they say, see, Gomer is in Turkey. Well, that Gomer in Turkey was a colony. All of the northern peoples, the Scythian peoples, the Germanic peoples, the Scandinavian peoples, they all came down and started colonies in the area south of the Black Sea in Turkey and Aram. So you have to understand that that's a colony of Gomer, not Gomer's homeland. Right now, we're only in the very early stage setting and preparation for the eventual invasion of Israel that's going to be made by Russia and her allies. Currently, Russia is mired in a war with Ukraine, where she found out that she's bitten out way more than she could chew. This is a much bigger situation than she anticipated. But in many ways, this was necessary for Russia. Russia needs this situation to harden her military, to strengthen her military, to build up her military. And she needs to strengthen the resolve of her leadership in the country. Currently, we see Iran extending her tentacles in the Middle East, and we see Turkey playing both sides, holding hands with NATO and holding hands with Russia and Iran. And we see Israel making compromises that are going to hurt her economically and militarily in the future. Now, what future developments do we expect? Personally, I expect to see that Russia is going to win the Ukraine conflict in a way that intimidates her former Soviet Union vassals and intimidates Europe. I expect the U.S. to respond in an insubstantial way. I expect the current EU to fragment and pieces to drift west and some pieces to drift towards the Russia bloc. I expect the pieces that drift west are going to align themselves more closely with England and the fractured Roman Empire colonies like the U.S. and Canada. I expect the western half of the EU to end up resembling more the actual former western part of the Roman Empire. I expect Germany is going to align itself with the Russian bloc. I expect NATO to either tell Turkey to leave or Turkey to tell NATO to go take a hike. And Turkey is going to align itself with the Russian bloc. And I fully expect the nations immediately surrounding Israel, like Syria and Jordan and Lebanon, to embrace a much more radical position, be more open to radicalism, and to start prepping for a war with Israel. Now, eventually, we're going to see a full mobilization for the invasion of Israel. We're going to see massive armies from Russia and her immediate allies, and from Turkey and Iran and Sudan and from Germany and from a host of other nations. They're going to be gathering supplies and equipment and manpower in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan in preparation for this invasion. But we're still stuck in the current situation because right now, Russia still has to win the Ukraine war. She has to consolidate her main allies so they're in lockstep with her. She has to build up her military. She has to consolidate her position in Syria and the Middle East. And she has to win over Germany. And as I said earlier, the Gomer that's in modern Turkey was the colony of Gomer, not the homeland of Gomer. Now, prior to all this stuff happening, prior to Russia winning the Ukraine war and building this massive platform and coalition of allies and vassal states, prior to this, there is no possibility for a Russian-led invasion of Israel. And to get from where we are today to the mobilization for that war looks to be something that could easily go 2 to 3 years at a typical pace. Now, things could go faster, but they're not going to happen in a few weeks or a few months. Now, somewhere in the process between where we're at today and the full mobilization of Russia and all of our allies for this invasion of Israel, somewhere between now and then, in that time frame, the rapture is going to happen. Now, there are three potential scenarios for the rapture as far as this Russian invasion is concerned. The first one is that the church could go up in the rapture in the very near future, and the Russian invasion steps could go forwards at a very accelerated pace. Now, it could happen. I regard this as low odds, but it's not impossible. And some of my friends that think this way, well, they might prove to be right. Two, we could go up in the immediate future, and there will be a 2 or 3 year long window, maybe even a little longer, between the rapture and the invasion of Israel. Now, I think this position is also a low odds position. I can't say it's impossible, but I do think the odds are relatively low. The third position is that we are going to be down here for a couple more years, God forbid, watching the rise of the Russian juggernaut. We're going to see the first indications that the juggernaut is preparing for a soon invasion of Israel, and then we're going to go up in the rapture prior to the Gog and Magog invasion. If this scenario comes to pass, we might even see the initial aspects of the ramp up for the invasion. We might see the advance parties showing up in Syria. We might see them building bases in Syria and Lebanon. We might see the initial shipments of equipment. I'm not saying we will. I'm just saying we could. When we're talking about prophetic convergence here, we're racing towards this scenario, and we don't know how much time between that scenario and the rapture is going to exist. We don't know if there's 2 weeks between that stage and the rapture, or 2 months, or a year. We have no idea. At any rate, I think this third stage, where we're going to see the initial setup for the invasion of Israel by Russia, I think we're going to see that, and then we're going to go up. Now, I don't know how far into that initial setup we're going to go, but I think we're going to probably see some of it. Now, in conclusion, the Bible is clear that we cannot know the day nor the hour, and pointing to dates based on calendar events is a misguided practice. And this is true whether we point to a date and say we're absolutely certain of this date, or whether we point to a date and we say there's a strong possibility here. However, there's a big difference between pointing to prophetic convergence and pointing to a date. And I think people need to understand this. The Bible is clear that we can see the day approaching if we take heed to the convergence of the birth pangs of the tribulation. And we have a moral obligation to heed these signs of the times. The Lord rebuked the Pharisees for not heeding the signs of the times. He called them hypocrites, and he said, wait a minute, you can read the signs in the clouds and read the weather 2 or 3 days ahead of time, or at least a day ahead of time, but you can't look at the signs of the times and read what's going on and see what's going to happen in the next year or two? You can't do that? What's wrong with you? Now, when I examine the signs that are going on in the world around us, when I examine the prophetic convergence in the world right now, I don't see any evidence that we absolutely have to go up in the immediate future, like in the next few weeks or months. I know some of my brothers do. Some of my dearest friends on earth think that. And I don't think they're wrong in a big way. You've got to understand me. But I do think that it's a mistake. All I see is evidence that the stage for the tribulation is being set and that the pace is accelerating. And I look at this stage and I don't know whether we got weeks, months, or years. I suspect we got a couple years left, but this expectation is based on the fact that I think that we go up very shortly prior to the beginning of the tribulation and not a long ways prior to the tribulation. Now, this isn't to say that we can't go up in the immediate future. I hope we do. I hope my friends are right we're going up this fall. This is only to say that it isn't certain that we're going to go up this fall, that we can't be certain that we're going to go up this fall. Well, maybe I should say some people might be certain that we're going to go up this fall. But I suspect that come Christmas, they're not going to be certain anymore. And I suspect the odds are pretty high that we are still going to be here 1 or 2 years down the road. Now, I have heard folks say, if we don't go up in the next few weeks or months, we will be facing things that can only properly happen in the tribulation. Folks, please, please, please do not believe this kind of talk. A year from now, if the rapture hasn't happened and we are still here, and I suspect that this is going to be the case, things are definitely going to be worse, but they are not going to be tribulation bad. I think when people are thinking that way, they are really underestimating how bad it's going to be in the tribulation. What's going to happen if we're still here a year from now and 2 years from now? America will be getting a taste of what the other parts of the world have already long experienced. And we are going to come to realize that the birth pangs of the tribulation include, surprise, surprise, some tribulation. And not merely the ability to observe geopolitical events that are exciting to keep tabs on. Eyes wide open, brain engaged, heart on fire. We'll see you next time.